The autumn morning started like any other for Michael Chen. At exactly 7:15 a.m., his alarm clock spoke the time in its robotic voice, gently pulling him from his sleep. Michael reached out, his hand finding the familiar shape of his bedside table with practiced ease. 5 years of blindness had taught him to navigate his world through touch and sound, turning his other senses into powerful tools that made up for his lost sight. "Shadow, come here, boy," Michael called out softly. The sound of gentle paw steps approached his bed, followed by the warm touch of a wet nose against his hand. Shadow, his German Shepherd guide dog, had already been awake and waiting patiently for his handler to start their day together. Michael's fingers found Shadow's thick fur, and he smiled as he felt the dog's tail wagging against his leg. "Ready for another day at the office, buddy?" he asked, knowing that Shadow understood more than just the words. He understood the routine they had built together over the past 3 years. In the bathroom, Michael went through his morning routine with careful precision. His fingers traced over the braille labels on his toiletries, selecting the right bottles without hesitation. Shadow waited just outside the door, always alert, always present. The dog's steady breathing was a comfort that reminded Michael he was never truly alone. After a shower and change into his work clothes, a navy blue suit that his sister Sarah had helped him shop for, Michael made his way to the kitchen. Shadow's nails clicked softly against the hardwood floors as he followed. The apartment wasn't large, but it was perfectly organized for Michael's needs. Everything had its place, and nothing was ever moved without purpose. "Alexa, what's the weather like today?" Michael asked as he prepared Shadow's breakfast. The AI assistant reported a mild autumn day with a slight chance of rain, perfect weather for their walk to work. As Shadow ate from his bowl, Michael prepared his own simple breakfast of oatmeal and coffee, the familiar smells filling his small kitchen. At precisely 8 o'clock a.m., Michael attached Shadow's harness, feeling the straps and buckles with practiced fingers. The familiar routine carried a deeper meaning now. Each click and adjustment was part of a partnership that had transformed Michael's life. He remembered the first day Shadow came home with him, both of them nervous and uncertain. Now, they moved together like dancers who knew every step by heart. Outside, Michael commanded gently, and Shadow guided him to the door. Michael collected his messenger bag, white cane, always carried as a backup, and phone. He patted his pockets in a well-practiced check. Keys, wallet, work ID, all in their proper places. The elevator ride to the ground floor was quiet except for Mrs. Peterson from the fourth floor, who always greeted them with the same warm "good morning," Michael and Shadow. Michael smiled, appreciating how his neighbors had learned to announce themselves, making his world a little easier to navigate. Outside, the streets of downtown Seattle were coming to life. Shadow guided Michael confidently through the familiar route, pausing at each intersection with perfect timing. Michael could feel the morning sun on his face and smell the coffee from the corner cafe they always passed. The sounds of the city wrapped around them, cars honking in the distance, the chatter of other commuters, and the faint rumble of the light rail. Shadow navigated around a group of tourists, who Michael could hear exclaiming about Pike Place Market up ahead. The dog's movements were so smooth that Michael barely had to adjust his stride. This was why guide dogs were so amazing. They didn't just avoid obstacles, they found the clearest path forward. People who passed them often didn't realize that the handsome German Shepherd in the harness was more than just a dog. Shadow was Michael's eyes, his guardian, and his constant companion. Together, they had mastered this urban landscape, turning what could have been a challenging journey into a comfortable daily routine. As they approached the halfway point of their journey, Michael felt completely at peace. Shadow's steady pace and sure guidance gave him the confidence to move through the world as if his blindness was just a minor inconvenience rather than a disability. Little did either of them know that this normal autumn morning was about to become anything but ordinary. As Michael and Shadow approached Pike Place Market, the familiar sounds and smells of the busy marketplace filled the air. The sweet scent of fresh flowers mixed with the salty breeze from the nearby water, and the happy chatter of morning shoppers echoed around them. It was a route they had walked hundreds of times before, but today something was different. Shadow's pace began to change. At first, it was so subtle that Michael almost didn't notice. The German Shepherd's usual smooth gait became slightly hesitant, and his muscles tensed under the harness. Michael could feel these small changes through the handle, the way anyone might notice a change in a dance partner's movements after years of dancing together. "What's wrong?" Buddy? Michael asked softly, his free hand reaching down to touch Shadow's head. The dog's ears were perked up, not in their usual alert way, but in a more focused, almost worried position. Michael could feel the difference in the way Shadow's head was held, higher and more rigid than normal. A group of schoolchildren passed by, their excited voices filling the air as they headed toward the market for what sounded like a field trip. Usually, Shadow would guide Michael smoothly around such groups, maintaining their steady pace. But this time, the dog slowed down even more, and Michael felt him looking around more than usual. The morning crowd continued to flow around them, and Michael started to notice that Shadow was taking an unusually wide berth around certain people. This wasn't like his normal careful navigation. This was different. Shadow's breathing had changed too. Michael could hear it becoming slightly faster, more alert. "Easy, Shadow," Michael said, trying to reassure his companion. He couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. In their 3 years together, Shadow had never acted this way without good reason. The dog was professionally trained to stay calm in almost any situation. He had guided Michael through noisy construction sites, past barking dogs, and through crowded festivals without ever losing his cool. Michael pulled out his phone, thinking maybe he should call his sister Sarah. Before he could activate the voice command, Shadow suddenly stopped completely. This was not a normal traffic stop. This was Shadow planting himself firmly in place, his body becoming rigid with attention. The sounds of the market continued around them. A street musician playing guitar nearby, the calls of fish vendors setting up their stalls, the squeal of truck brakes as deliveries arrived. But Shadow seemed to be focusing on something else entirely. Michael could feel his dog's head turning slowly, tracking something or someone. "Is everything okay?" A kind voice asked from Michael's left. It was Linda, one of the flower sellers he passed every morning. She had learned to always announce herself before approaching. "I'm not sure," Michael replied honestly. "Shadow's acting a bit strange this morning." "Do you need any help?" Linda asked, her voice carrying a note of concern. Before Michael could answer, Shadow took a few steps forward, then stopped again. His tail, which usually hung in a relaxed position while working, was now held low and stiff. Michael had learned to read Shadow's body language through touch, and everything about his dog's posture was sending warning signals. The morning breeze carried the usual market smells, but Shadow's nose was working overtime. Michael could feel the dog's shoulders bunching and relaxing as he sniffed the air intently. Something had captured Shadow's complete attention, and whatever it was, the dog clearly considered it important enough to break from his usual routine. Michael stood there, his hand firmly on Shadow's harness, trying to piece together what might be happening. Years of working together had taught him to trust Shadow's instincts. The dog's training was exceptional, and his behavior had always been impeccable. If Shadow was acting this way, there had to be a serious reason. The normal sounds of the market seemed to fade into the background as Michael focused entirely on his dog's behavior. Shadow's breathing had become even more rapid, and Michael could feel small tremors running through the dog's body. Whatever was causing this reaction was getting closer, and Shadow's response was growing stronger. What happened next would make Michael realize that sometimes breaking protocol isn't just acceptable, it's absolutely necessary. What happened next occurred so quickly that the morning crowd barely had time to react. Shadow, the always professional guide dog who had never once broken his training in 3 years of service, suddenly transformed from a calm service animal into a protective guardian. The German shepherd's muscles bunched under Michael's hand, and before he could tighten his grip on the harness, Shadow lunged forward with surprising force. The sudden movement nearly pulled Michael off balance, but years of working with his dog had given him quick reflexes. He managed to stay upright, though his heart was racing from the unexpected action. "Shadow, stop," Michael commanded firmly, using the tone that had always worked before. But for the first time ever, Shadow ignored the command completely. The dog's deep bark echoed off the market buildings, sharp and aggressive, a sound Michael had never heard from his gentle companion. People nearby gasped and moved away quickly. Michael could hear the shuffle of feet and surprised exclamations as the crowd backed up. Through the confusion, he heard a man's voice cry out in shock, followed by the sound of stumbling steps. "Control your dog," the man shouted. His voice was higher pitched with fear, but there was something else in it, a tremor that seemed out of place. "Get this crazy animal away from me." Shadow's barks continued, and Michael could feel through the harness that his dog was positioning himself between Michael and the stranger. The dog's body was rigid with tension, and a low growl rumbled continuously in his chest. This wasn't random aggression. Shadow was clearly targeting this specific person. "What's happening?" Michael asked loudly, trying to make sense of the chaos around him. "Can someone tell me what's going on?" "Your dog just went nuts, man," someone in the crowd called out. "He just went straight for that businessman." Linda, the flower seller, had moved closer. "Michael, there's a man in a gray suit about 10 feet away from you," she explained quickly. "Your dog is keeping him backed up against the wall. He's not biting, just, well, he's not letting the man move." The sound of running feet approached, several sets of them. "Police!" "Everyone stay calm," an authoritative voice called out. Michael felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He had never had to deal with the police because of Shadow before. "Officer, this man's dog just attacked me for no reason," the stranger shouted, his voice shaking. "I want to press charges." But Shadow's behavior only intensified at the man's words. The dog's growl became deeper, more threatening. Michael had never imagined his gentle guide dog could make such a sound. It sent chills down his spine, even though he knew the aggression wasn't directed at him. "Sir, please stay where you are," one of the officers commanded, presumably to the stranger. "Ma'am, could you please tell us what you saw?" This was directed at Linda. As Linda began describing the incident, Michael noticed something odd. Despite Shadow's aggressive display, the dog wasn't actually trying to bite the stranger. All his years of training hadn't been forgotten. Shadow was deliberately keeping his distance while ensuring the man couldn't move closer to Michael. "The dog started acting strange a few minutes ago," Linda explained to the police. "I was watching because it was so unusual. He kept looking around like he was searching for something. Then this man walked past and, well, that's when everything happened." More police officers arrived, and Michael could hear them starting to clear the growing crowd. The morning market sounds had changed to excited whispers and the clicks of phone cameras. This would probably be all over social media within hours. "Sir," a female officer approached Michael, her voice professional but kind. "I'm Detective Martinez. Could you tell me about your dog? Has anything like this ever happened before?" Michael shook his head, still trying to process the situation. "Never. Shadow has been my guide dog for 3 years. He's never even growled at anyone before today. He's been through thousands of hours of training, and his behavior has always been perfect." As Michael spoke these words, he realized that this fact made the current situation even more disturbing. What could have caused his perfectly trained companion to break protocol so dramatically? The answer would soon prove to be more chilling than anyone expected. The next 30 minutes at Pike Place Market were unlike anything Michael had experienced in his life. The familiar morning sounds of the market had been replaced by police radios crackling, officers giving directions, and the constant murmur of gathered onlookers. Shadow, however, had transformed again, this time from fierce protector back to calm guide dog, though he remained unusually alert. Detective Martinez had set up a small area near Linda's flower stand for taking statements. The sweet smell of roses mixed with the morning air as she spoke to Michael, her voice carrying a note of curiosity rather than accusation. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I need you to tell me everything you noticed about Shadow's behavior this morning, even the smallest details." Michael kept one hand on Shadow's harness as he explained, finding comfort in the familiar feel of his companion's steady presence. "He started acting strange about 10 minutes before the incident. His breathing changed, his muscles got tense, and he kept stopping and looking around." As Michael spoke, he noticed something odd. The well-dressed stranger was being questioned by 2 other officers nearby, and Shadow's ears would perk up every time the man spoke. The dog wasn't growling anymore, but his attention remained fixed on the man's location. "Sir, please stay where you are," one of the officers said sharply to the stranger, who seemed to be trying to leave. "We still need to take your statement." "This is ridiculous." The man's voice had an edge of panic now. "I'm going to be late for a meeting. That dog attacked me. What else do you need to know?" Detective Martinez's notebook made a soft scratching sound as she wrote something down. Michael could hear her shifting her position, probably looking at the increasingly agitated stranger. Linda, who had stayed nearby to give her witness statement, spoke up. "That's not exactly true," she said firmly. The dog didn't attack you. You blocked your path and barked, but he never tried to bite. More officers arrived at the scene, and Michael could hear them talking in low voices with Detective Martinez. Shadow's ears kept moving, tracking all the activity around them, but he stayed perfectly positioned by Michael's side. "Mr. Chen," Detective Martinez said, returning to Michael, "we're going to need to file a formal report about this incident. However, there's something unusual about the situation that we need to investigate further." Michael nodded, feeling a mix of worry and curiosity. Is Shadow going to be in trouble? He's never done anything like this before. "That's actually what interests me," Martinez replied, her voice lowered slightly. "Guide dogs don't just break their training without a serious reason. They're among the most highly trained animals in the world." As if to prove her point, Shadow sat calmly at Michael's feet, his behavior now the perfect picture of a professional service dog. The contrast between his current demeanor and his actions just moments ago was striking. The stranger's voice rose again, more insistent this time. "I have rights. You can't keep me here. I demand that dog be reported to the Service Animal Board." Michael heard Detective Martinez shift beside him, her jacket rustling as she turned. "Sir," she called to the man, her tone sharp. "Please remain with Officers Johnson and Rodriguez. We have a few more questions." She turned back to Michael. "Mr. Chen, is there someone we can call for you? Family or friends who could come help you sort this out?" Michael thought of his sister Sarah, who lived nearby. "Yes, my sister. She knows Shadow well and might be able to help understand what happened." As Michael gave Sarah's contact information to Detective Martinez, he noticed the stranger's voice getting more agitated in the background. The man seemed desperate to leave, which struck Michael as odd. If someone had been wrongly attacked by a dog, wouldn't they want to stay and make sure everything was properly documented? Shadow's ears perked up again, and his muscles tensed slightly under Michael's hand. The dog was still tracking every movement the stranger made, even while appearing to rest calmly at Michael's feet. What no one knew at that moment was that Shadow's actions had already set in motion a chain of events that would uncover something far more sinister than a simple dog attack. Detective Sarah Martinez sat in the dimly lit security office of Pike Place Market, her eyes fixed on the multiple screens before her. Each screen showed footage from different security cameras, playing videos from the past few days. What she saw made her lean forward in her chair, her coffee forgotten beside her. "Stop right there," she told the security officer. "Go back 3 days, same timestamp." The officer rewound the footage, and Martinez watched carefully. There he was again, the same well-dressed man who had been attacked by Shadow. He was walking the same route, maintaining the same distance behind Michael Chen and his guide dog. "Show me yesterday's footage," Martinez requested, making notes in her small black notebook. The pattern was clear. The man had been following Michael for at least 3 days, always staying about 30 feet behind, always wearing different suits but carrying the same brown leather briefcase. Outside the security office, Michael sat with his sister Sarah, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier. Shadow lay at their feet, still alert but calm. The dog's behavior had returned completely to normal, except for one thing. He still turned his head sharply whenever the stranger's voice carried from the nearby interview room. "I just don't understand," Sarah said, her hand resting protectively on her brother's arm. "Shadow's never done anything like this before. He's always been so gentle." Michael nodded, absently patting Shadow's head. "That's what makes this so strange. It's like he knew something we didn't." Detective Martinez emerged from the security office, her footsteps quick and purposeful. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I need to ask you something important. Have you used any ATMs in the past few days?" Michael thought for a moment. "Yes, I withdrew money yesterday morning before work." "Shadow knows which ATM I use. It's part of our regular route." "And the day before?" Martinez pressed. "Yes, actually, I had to withdraw cash for my building's maintenance fee." Martinez made another note. "One more question. Does anyone else know your daily routine? The exact path you take to work?" Before Michael could answer, a commotion broke out in the interview room. There was a crash, followed by shouting. Shadow immediately stood up, his posture alert but not aggressive. "Stop him!" an officer yelled. The sound of running feet echoed through the hallway. The well-dressed man burst out of the interview room, his carefully maintained appearance now disheveled. But what caught everyone's attention was what had fallen from his briefcase when it split open during his attempted escape. A ski mask, a small handgun, and several zip ties scattered across the floor. Two officers tackled him before he could reach the exit. As they handcuffed him, his expensive suit jacket rode up, revealing something else clipped to his belt, a small electronic device with a blinking light. Detective Martinez quickly picked up the device, her eyes widening with recognition. "It's a signal jammer," she explained to Michael and Sarah. "It's designed to block cell phone calls and GPS signals. This is why he's been so nervous. Carrying this alone is a federal offense." The pieces were starting to fall into place. Repeated ATM visits, the same man following the same route, the items in his briefcase. Shadow hadn't just detected a threat, he had prevented a carefully planned crime. "We'll need you both to stay a bit longer," Martinez said to Michael and Sarah. "But first, I think you should know what Shadow actually did today." She paused, looking down at the German Shepherd with newfound respect. "Your dog didn't just act up randomly. Based on our security footage and what we found, he probably saved your life." Sarah gasped softly, her hand tightening on Michael's arm. Michael reached down to touch Shadow, feeling the familiar fur of the dog who was so much more than just his guide. In the background, they could hear the stranger's protests as he was led away by police. But now his refined voice held none of its previous confidence, only the desperate tone of someone whose carefully laid plans have been completely destroyed by the one thing he hadn't counted on: a guide dog's protective instincts. In the brightly lit interview room at the Seattle Police Department, Marcus Thompson sat with his expensive suit wrinkled and his confident facade completely shattered. The man who had appeared so polished and professional just hours ago now looked defeated as Detective Martinez laid out the evidence on the metal table between them. "Let's go through this again," Martinez said, spreading photographs from the security cameras. "You've been following Mr. Chen for 5 days. You knew his routine because you watched him withdraw money from the same ATM every morning. You planned to use his disability to force him to withdraw large amounts of cash." Thompson stared at his handcuffed wrists, his shoulders slumped. The police had found more items in his car parked near Pike Place Market, detailed maps of the area, notes about Michael's daily schedule, and even photographs taken of Michael and Shadow from a distance. "What I don't understand," Martinez continued, shuffling through her notes, "is why you didn't expect the dog to be a problem. Didn't you research guide dogs at all?" Thompson laughed bitterly. "Of course I did. I spent weeks planning this. Guide dogs are trained to be non-aggressive. They're supposed to ignore distractions and stay focused on their job. That dog should have just kept walking like he did every other day I followed them." In another room down the hall, Michael sat with Sarah and Officer Jenkins as they listened to Thompson's confession being recorded. Shadow lay at Michael's feet, finally relaxed now that the threat was gone. The dog's extraordinary actions made more sense with each new detail that emerged. "He's done this before," Officer Jenkins explained, reading from a report on his tablet. "Marcus Thompson was released from prison 8 months ago after serving 5 years for similar crimes in Portland. He targeted people with disabilities, thinking they would be easy victims. He'd follow them for days, learn their routines, then strike when they were most vulnerable." Sarah's hand tightened on Michael's arm, but he didn't count on Shadow, she said softly. Back in the interview room, Thompson was still talking, now eager to explain himself as if understanding it all would somehow lessen his guilt. "I watched them for days," he said, his voice rising with frustration. "The dog never reacted to anything. People would pass by, cars would honk, kids would shout. Nothing fazed him. He was the perfect guide dog." Martinez leaned forward. "But that's exactly why Shadow knew you were different. Guide dogs are trained to ignore normal distractions, yes, but they're also trained to recognize genuine threats. You weren't just another person on the street, you were a predator, and Shadow could sense your intentions." In the other room, Michael reached down to stroke Shadow's fur. The dog had been watching him for signs of distress all day, staying closer than usual, offering comfort with gentle nudges of his nose. Their bond, already strong from 3 years of working together, felt even deeper now. Officer Jenkins continued reading from his tablet. "According to the evidence we found in Thompson's apartment, he had plans to target at least 3 other people with disabilities in the Seattle area. He kept detailed notes on their routines, just like he did with you, Mr. Chen." "Shadow didn't just protect me," Michael said quietly, understanding dawning in his voice. He stopped this man from hurting other people too. Meanwhile, Detective Martinez was finishing her interview with Thompson. You'll be charged with attempted armed robbery, carrying an illegal weapon, possession of a signal jamming device, and stalking, she informed him. Given your previous convictions, you're looking at a significant sentence. Thompson slumped further in his chair. All my planning, he muttered. Every detail was perfect. But I never thought. How could that dog know? How could he tell I was different from everyone else who passed them on the street? Martinez gathered her files, standing to leave the interview room. That's the thing about guide dogs, she said. They're not just trained to guide, they're trained to protect. And sometimes they can sense things that even we can't see. As the detective left the room, her words hung in the air, capturing the remarkable truth about these extraordinary animals and their deep bonds with their handlers. Shadow had proven that a guide dog's abilities went far beyond simple navigation. They could sense danger that others might miss and act decisively to protect those they cared about. The story of Shadow and Michael spread through Seattle like wildfire. By the next morning, every local news station had picked up the story, and their photographs were on the front page of the Seattle Times. The headline read, Hero Guide Dog Thwarts Criminal's Plot, Saves Owner's Life. Michael's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the previous evening. News reporters, guide dog organizations, and even national morning shows wanted to hear their story. Sarah helped him manage the sudden flood of attention, screening calls and organizing interviews. You won't believe this, Sarah said, reading from her laptop as they sat in Michael's living room. The video someone took of Shadow stopping Thompson has over 2 million views already. People are calling Shadow the guardian angel guide dog. Shadow, completely unaware of his newfound fame, lay at Michael's feet just as he always did. The only difference was the new medal hanging from his collar, a special commendation from the Seattle Police Department, presented by Detective Martinez herself in a small ceremony that morning. The police chief wants you both to speak at next week's community safety meeting, Sarah continued. They think your story could help other people understand how to stay safe, especially those with disabilities. Michael nodded, running his fingers through Shadow's fur. The events of the past few days had changed something fundamental in how he viewed his relationship with his guide dog. Shadow wasn't just his eyes, he was his protector, his guardian, his partner in the truest sense. At the local guide dog training center, trainers were already using Shadow's story to teach new handlers about the deep bond between guide dogs and their owners. Lucy Martinez, the center's head trainer, explained to her students how remarkable Shadow's actions have been. Guide dogs are trained to ignore distractions, she told the class, but they're also trained to recognize real threats. What makes Shadow's case so special is how he maintained his training even while protecting his handler. He didn't attack, he contained the threat and alerted others to the danger. The impact of Shadow's actions reached beyond the guide dog community. Local police departments started requesting presentations about service animal behavior, wanting to better understand how dogs like Shadow could help them identify potential criminals. Detective Martinez had become a regular visitor to Michael's office, where she worked with him to develop a safety awareness program for people with disabilities. What happened to you could have happened to anyone, she explained, but your story is helping us understand how to prevent these crimes before they happen. Even Pike Place Market had been affected by the events. Linda, the flower seller who had witnessed everything, now kept a special bowl of dog treats behind her stand. Every morning when Michael and Shadow passed by, she would call out her usual greeting and offer Shadow a well-deserved treat. Your dog changed how we see service animals, Linda told Michael one morning. We always knew they were important, but now we understand they're not just working animals, they're guardians too. The local news did a follow-up story a week after the incident. They interviewed Michael at his office, where Shadow had returned to his usual calm, professional behavior. The reporter seemed amazed by how normal everything appeared. It's like he knows exactly when to be a regular guide dog and when to be a protector, the reporter observed, watching Shadow guide Michael through their daily routine. Michael smiled, remembering the events that had brought them to this moment. That's the amazing thing about guide dogs, he said. They're trained to help us live normal lives, but they're always watching out for us too. Shadow showed everyone that these dogs are capable of so much more than we realized. As the story continued to spread, more people began to understand the extraordinary capabilities of service animals. Shadow had not only protected Michael, he had opened people's eyes to the remarkable bond between guide dogs and their handlers, a bond that went far beyond simple assistance to something much deeper and more meaningful. And Shadow, he continued his daily routine, guiding Michael through the streets of Seattle with the same dedication as always. The only difference was the way people looked at them now, understanding that they were watching something truly special. A partnership built on trust, training, and a dog's unwavering instinct to protect those they love. 6 months after the incident at Pike Place Market, Michael Chen stood on a stage at the National Guide Dog Association's annual conference in Chicago. Shadow sat calmly beside him, his medal from the Seattle Police Department polished and gleaming on his collar. The conference hall was packed with trainers, handlers, and service dog advocates from across the country. When I lost my sight 5 years ago, Michael began, his voice carrying through the quiet room, I thought I was losing my independence. What I didn't know was that I was about to gain something extraordinary, not just a guide dog, but a guardian angel in disguise. In the front row, Detective Martinez smiled. She had flown in specially for this presentation, having become an advocate for service animal awareness in law enforcement. The training program she developed with Michael had already been adopted by police departments in 12 states. People often asked me if Shadow's behavior that day was unusual. Michael continued, reaching down to pat his dog's head. They want to know if he did something beyond his training. But what I've learned is that guide dogs are capable of so much more than we ever imagined. They don't just guide us, they read the world in ways we can't understand. The audience listened intently as Michael shared how Shadow had detected Marcus Thompson's threatening presence. Thompson had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, and his case had led to increased penalties for crimes targeting people with disabilities. What made Shadow's actions so remarkable wasn't just that he protected me, Michael explained. It was how he did it. He didn't attack. He didn't panic. He used his training in a new way, showing us that these dogs are constantly processing information and making complex decisions to keep their handlers safe. Dr. Emily Roberts, a leading animal behavior expert who had studied Shadow's case, stepped up to share her insights. What we've learned from Shadow has changed how we think about guide dog training, she said. These dogs aren't just following commands, they're actively assessing their environment, making judgment calls, and adapting their training to new situations. The scientific community had taken notice too. Research programs at several universities were now studying how guide dogs processed environmental cues and identified potential threats. Shadow's story had opened up new understanding about the cognitive abilities of service animals. Back in Seattle, things had mostly returned to normal for Michael and Shadow. They still took their daily walk past Linda's flower stand at Pike Place Market, where Shadow would receive his regular treat. But now they often stopped to talk with curious passersby who recognized them from their story, which had been featured on national news programs and even inspired a documentary about guide dogs. The most important lesson, Michael told the conference audience, isn't about crime prevention or even about safety. It's about trust. Every day, people with disabilities put their trust in these extraordinary animals. Shadow showed us that this trust goes far deeper than we knew. As Michael finished his speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Shadow remained perfectly calm beside him, exactly as his training required. This was the true marvel of guide dogs. They could be both everyday helpers and extraordinary protectors, knowing exactly when each role was needed. Later that evening, in their hotel room, Michael sat quietly with Shadow. The dog's head rested on his lap, just as it had done countless times before. But now, Michael understood that behind those gentle brown eyes was a mind capable of complex decisions, a heart full of protective instinct, and a spirit dedicated to keeping him safe. You know what, buddy? Michael said softly, scratching behind Shadow's ears. You didn't just save my life that day. You showed the world what guide dogs are really capable of. You showed them that sometimes angels have 4 legs and a wagging tail. Shadow's tail thumped gently against the floor, and he nuzzled closer to Michael's hand. To him, nothing had changed. He was simply doing what guide dogs had always done, dedicating his life to protecting and helping his human, one day at a time. Their story had touched hearts across the nation, changed policies, and deepened scientific understanding. But perhaps its greatest impact was in helping people see what had been true all along. that guide dogs were not just trained assistants but extraordinary beings capable of judgment, devotion, and even heroism. They were, in every sense, guardian angels in disguise.